What's up, freediver fans? My name is Christian. I'm a PFI freedive instructor in Palm Beach, Florida. Tonight, I'm here at Florida Freedivers, and we're going to talk about everything you need to know about freedive safety. First off, let's break down the differences between a loss of motor control and then a blackout, and then we're going to talk about how to deal with each of those. So first things first, loss of motor control. I find the easiest way to think about an LMC or loss of motor control is to understand that the most confusing part about this thing is the fact that there are like a million different names for it. Samba, getting the shakes, gray out, near blackout, loss of motor control, LMC, and a bunch of other names. What you need to understand is they all mean the same exact thing. So to make things simple, for the rest of this video, I'm going to refer to it as a loss of motor control or an LMC for short. Just to understand, as we move out of this video and you hear your dive buddies or other divers talk about similar things, maybe they even have a different name than the ones I rattled off, but they all mean the same thing. And the easiest way to think about these LMCs is picture yourself on a phone call with a friend where you have really bad service and you can't hear everything they're saying. It's kind of broken up, there's an incomplete signal, you only hear half of what they're saying. In the same sense, when we have a loss of motor control, there's so little oxygen in our brain is no longer able to send a complete signal to the rest of our body. So the nice, crisp recovery breaths that I would normally do at the surface turn from this into this kind of shaky or difficulty breathing, stuttered breaths like that. And the nice, crisp arm movements I have to say, I'm okay, or to maybe even kick myself up a little bit higher out of the water, that turns into this really shaky and convulsive movements, just like this. So all together, an LMC might look something like this. Just understand, it can look different for different people, but the two things you're looking for to determine whether or not your dive buddy is actually having an LMC is the difficulty breathing and the shaking and convulsing. Now, this does not happen all the time, but another thing you might notice if your dive buddy is having an LMC is their mask bouncing up and down off their face, just like that. And what that is that's your dive buddy trying to breathe, but trying to do so through their nose. And because we have the mask on, now it's going to bounce back and forth on our face. Now, let's talk about blackouts, because they are a little different. So let's take that same phone call we were on with our friend, but now instead of having bad service, our phone is gonna run out of juice. Now, my battery is dead. Just like it, that does not mean my phone is ready to go into the trash can so I can buy a new phone. In the same sense, after a blackout, I am not dead. Instead, we're just in this low power or conservation mode. And this is where there's some really cool things that your body does that are phenomenal, and they do a great job of protecting you. The first thing you're going to do after a blackout is totally relax and try to conserve as much oxygen as you can. So if you have a big chest and lung full of air, you're gonna relax and let all of that out. The next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna close your mouth because your body realizes it needs to protect its own airway. And this is why it's super important that we don't dive with a snorkel in our mouths. If I were to close my mouth with a snorkel in it, water can still get into my airway, and that is a huge risk. But without a snorkel in my mouth is going to close and stay closed to try and prevent any water from entering into my airway or my lungs. From here, there's only two reasons that I'm ever going to take a breath. The first is if the nerve endings all over my face realize that they're no longer underwater where it's dangerous to breathe, but now they're above water where it's safe to breathe. In that case, my face and those nerve endings is going to actually allow my brain to wake itself up on its own. The second reason I would take a breath is if I have what's called a terminal gasp. And your terminal gasp, that's going to occur after you've blacked out and you've burnt through what is essentially your reserve tank of oxygen saved specifically for a blackout. And when you reach that point, now it's time to do or die. And in a last-ditch effort to restore oxygen to your body, you will have this Hail Mary breath that might look something like this. And that is going to be our biggest fear as freedivers, is if we have that terminal gasp underwater, we get water into our lungs, and that is a really big deal. There's a really good chance we're never going to come back from that. So now let's break down how we're actually going to safety both these LMCs and blackouts. And the common theme for both of these is going to be protect the airway. That is the number one thing that should be going on in your mind if you have to save a dive buddy. Protect the airway, protect the airway, protect the airway. If you protect the airway and you make it impossible for water to get in your dive buddy's mouth, that's going to make it impossible for water to get into their lungs, and it's going to greatly reduce the risk of having a serious blackout that results in long-term consequences, or even a serious LMC that has long-term consequences. So to protect my dive buddy's airway during a loss of motor control, I like to grab them by the arm. And rather than grab them down here by their elbow, I like to slide my hand all the way up into their armpit. I'll throw their elbow up against my stomach here so I can really leverage them up higher with that fulcrum I've created with their upper arm. And then I'm going to place my free hand underneath my dive buddy's chin. I'm not trying to annoy them by touching them on the face when what I really want them to do is breathe. All I'm doing is keeping my hand right below their chin, so if they fall forward, I'm gonna catch their face before it touches the water. Those two things right there are the most important thing to do. I'm keeping my dive buddy's head above the surface, protecting his airway. I'm double protecting his airway by making sure if he drops his head, I'm catching it before it hits the water. Then from there, everything else is far less important. But what I still like to do is encourage my dive buddy to breathe. I'll just say something nice, slow, and clear, like breathe, breathe. And as silly as it might sound to need to remind a dive buddy to do something as basic as breathing, you are very confused and have very faulty judgment most of the time when you're hypoxic enough to have an LMC or a blackout. So simply having your dive buddy tell you to breathe can go a really long way. The first time I ever had an LMC, instead of breathing, I was holding a fish, shaking like this, saying, "Look at my fish, pretty cool snapper." It actually, for me, in that instance, took my dive buddy reminding me, "Christian, breathe," for me to process in my head, wait a second, the most important thing for me to do right now is to breathe. Then we can focus on showing off the fish I just shot. Finally, let's talk about how to deal with blackouts. Same thing as with loss of motor controls, we're gonna put a huge emphasis on protecting the airway. And this is going to come first with underwater blackouts. Remember I said the first thing your body does after a blackout is it relaxes and lets any excess air out? Well, the good news there is if there is a blackout underwater, that means it's super visible. You're likely to see bubbles. I like to say bubbles means troubles, because if my dive buddy is blowing bubbles underwater, it is almost a guaranteed sign that it's because they blacked out. So that lets me know that it's my turn to go down and protect my dive buddy's airway. So if I'm swimming up a dive buddy who has blacked out underwater, I'm gonna do something called head sandwich as I swim them to the surface. I'm gonna put the palm of one of my hands underneath their chin. I'm gonna slap the back of their head with my other hand, turning their head into a sandwich. And then I'm gonna make sure to cover their mouth and pinch their nose. And it doesn't matter how you pinch their nose, as long as you're making sure that any water that may have gotten into their mask does not have a way to get into the nose. So just like this, I've covered their mouth and their nose. I'm protecting both of those as I swim them up towards the surface. After that, I will immediately lay my dive buddy onto their back. And once they're at the surface, I make sure that the top priority is their face never gets wet again. So if there's waves and I need to lift them up, that's okay. If I need to reposition myself so that I can hold them higher above the water, I will do that. But I'm just going to lay them on their back and ensure that I have them fully out of the water so their face is entirely dry and their airway is completely protected. From here, I'll remove my dive buddy's mask by pinching the nose and just pulling it onto their forehead. And then I'm gonna slowly tap on their cheek, making sure that as I do tap on their cheek, I'm not just splashing water on their face. It's a nice tap right here on the cheek. I'm gonna then blow across their eyes. I'm gonna specifically target their eyeballs because that's the most sensitive part of their face. And a nice, concise, kind of crisp exhale so they can really feel all of that air going across their face. And then finally, I'm just gonna tell them, breathe, breathe. And these three things put together are what we call blow tap talk.